The year was 1899. The air in Blackwood Creek, Kentucky, was thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth and the distant metallic tang of the nearby river. The late autumn had draped the landscape in a perpetual muted gray, making the small insular community feel isolated, clinging to the edge of the sprawling shadowed forests. Oil lamps cast weak, shivering pools of light onto the cobblestone streets, barely cutting through the dense fog that rolled in from the surrounding hills. Our protagonist, Elias Thorne, a young, gaunt man of 25 with tired eyes and a meticulous, almost obsessive nature, stood on the porch of the dilapidated boarding house he called home. Elias was not a local. He was a junior investigator from the Louisville Private Detective Agency, sent to Blackwood Creek for a peculiar and unnerving case. He was tasked with locating a young woman named Clara Monroe, who had vanished 3 weeks prior. The local authorities, a slow-moving, overwhelmed group, had exhausted their meager resources and simply labeled it a runaway case, a common enough occurrence in the difficult times. But Clara's older brother, a prosperous man in the city, had insisted otherwise, fearing the worst. Elias clutched the worn leather satchel containing his meager investigation notes and the only known photograph of Clara, a solemn, almost fearful girl with wide, dark eyes. His assignment was simple: uncover the truth, however ugly it might be. Elias knew where he had to start. Every rumor, every hushed whisper in the local tavern pointed toward one place: the imposing, isolated manor house situated on the highest ridge overlooking Blackwood Creek. It was the home of Adeline Monroe, Clara's mother. The locals spoke of Adeline with a mixture of pity and intense, palpable fear. She was a widow, a figure shrouded in grief and eccentricity since the accidental death of her husband, a respected but equally strange local physician 5 years earlier. Adeline was rumored to be fiercely controlling, a matriarch whose possessiveness bordered on the pathological, especially concerning her daughters. The ascent to the Monroe property was difficult. The road was barely maintained, swallowed by mud and overgrowth. When he finally reached the iron gates, they stood slightly ajar, groaning on their rusty hinges as if sighing a warning. The house itself was a stark, Gothic monstrosity of dark stone and unforgiving angles, its windows like empty, judging eyes. A chilling silence hung around the place, so profound it was almost deafening, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock he could faintly hear from within. Elias straightened his coat and approached the massive oak front door. He knocked, the sound echoing hollowly in the sudden quiet. The moments that followed stretched, thick with anticipation. The door was eventually opened by a woman who matched Adeline's description perfectly. She was tall, with a rigid, upright posture that spoke of old wealth and uncompromising will. Her hair was pulled back tightly, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. Her eyes, however, were the most unsettling feature, deep-set, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. They seemed to assess, judge, and dismiss all at once. Yes? Adeline's voice was low, smooth, and chillingly controlled, like water running over cold stone. Mrs. Monroe, my name is Elias Thorne. I'm a private investigator. I've been hired to look into your daughter Clara's disappearance. Elias's voice was firm, though the oppressive atmosphere of the house made him instinctively lower it. Adeline's lips barely moved. I've spoken to the local constables. Clara has simply run away. She was an impressionable, difficult child, always seeking an escape from her responsibilities here. Her explanation was too smooth, too rehearsed. It was a statement, not a question of fact. With all due respect, Mrs. Monroe, her brother is deeply concerned. He doesn't believe she would leave without a word. May I ask you a few questions about the days leading up to her departure? And perhaps, if you don't mind, look around the house. Adeline's gaze sharpened, a faint flicker of annoyance, perhaps even alarm, passing through her eyes. There is nothing to see. The girl packed a small bag and was gone by morning, but I suppose you must do your duty. She stepped aside, a gesture of cold resignation. "Be quick about it, Mr. Thorne. I have little patience for these intrusions." The interior of the house was a mausoleum of wealth and despair. The furniture was draped in heavy, dark cloths, and the air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and lilies. The silence was even more profound inside, making every footstep a thunderous intrusion. Elias began his careful inspection. He noticed the excessive number of locks on the master bedroom door, far more than necessary for simple privacy. He also observed the strange way Adeline stood, rigidly poised by the main staircase, watching his every movement. She was observing him, yes, but her focus seemed to be divided, as if she were listening for something else. Something only she could hear. In the parlor, he paused near a large, beautifully framed portrait of Adeline, her husband, and their two daughters, Clara and the elder sister Eliza, who had also left Blackwood Creek years ago under equally vague circumstances. Clara in the portrait looked slightly more relaxed, but still wore that look of perpetual worry. Elias noticed a small, almost imperceptible scratch near the corner of Clara's painted mouth, as if someone had tried to physically mar her image. "A beautiful family," Elias commented, testing the water. "We were," Adeline stated flatly, "before the disappointments." Elias turned, his suspicions solidifying. The house was not just old and dusty, it felt wrong. It was a place of secrets, tightly sealed and guarded by the woman standing before him. He knew he had to tread carefully. He needed an ally, someone who could confirm or deny the local rumors, someone who knew Adeline's true nature. His first official visit had yielded nothing concrete, but it had accomplished something far more valuable. It had confirmed his deepest investigative instinct. The mother was hiding something profound and sinister. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Monroe. I will be in town for a few days. Should you recall anything at all, no matter how insignificant, please send word." As Elias walked back toward the gate, the cold realization settled on him. Adeline hadn't been watching him to ensure he didn't steal anything. She had been watching him to ensure he didn't discover the unsettling truth locked away within the terrifying silence of the house on the ridge. This was not a runaway case. This was a complex, human horror story, and he had just stepped into its first, ominous chapter. The mystery had begun. Before you dive deeper into the chilling secrets of Blackwood Creek, make sure you don't miss any part of this terrifying series. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you can follow Elias Thorne's investigation through every twist and turn. The next morning, the air was sharp with the impending cold of winter. Elias found himself in the Blackwood Pig, the town's only tavern, a dimly lit, smoky establishment where the true currency was gossip and mistrust of outsiders. He ordered a weak coffee and positioned himself at the end of the bar, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible while listening intently. The local sentiment was clear. The Monroe family was peculiar, but Adeline was simply a grieving, overbearing woman. "She loved them too much, that's her trouble," old Mr. Hemlock, the tavern owner, grumbled while wiping down a chipped mug. "After the doctor passed, she just got tighter. Didn't want Clara going the same way as Eliza." Elias pressed him gently. "What way was that, Mr. Hemlock?" Hemlock leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, smelling strongly of stale tobacco and cheap whiskey. "Eliza, the older one, fine girl. Ran off to New York maybe 6 years back. Just up and left. Adeline said she was ungrateful, chasing city nonsense. But folks here know different. Eliza was terrified of her mother, said Adeline kept her locked up, controlled her every move. Clara was the same, just quieter." Elias realized the true horror might not be a single event, but a pattern of psychological control. He noted the recurring theme. The mother's possessiveness was so severe it drove her daughters to desperate measures. But Adeline's chilling demeanor suggested something darker than simple maternal tyranny. Runaways usually left behind a trace of hope, a letter, a goodbye. Clara had left nothing. His next step was finding someone who worked at the house. He eventually tracked down Thomas, a wiry older man who tended the Monroe grounds twice a week, working mostly outside the perimeter of Adeline's direct view. Elias met him in a secluded, muddy path near the sprawling tobacco fields where Thomas was harvesting the last of the crop. "Mr. Thorne, you'd be wise to leave well enough alone," Thomas cautioned, leaning heavily on his shovel. His eyes darted nervously towards the distant ridge. "That house holds its secrets tight." Elias placed a $20 gold piece, a substantial sum for the time, onto the muddy lip of the path. "I just need to know what you saw, Thomas. Anything unusual in the weeks before Clara vanished?" Thomas finally relented, his fingers trembling as he pocketed the coin. "Adeline. She was agitated. More than usual. She was always tidying, cleaning the house herself. But the week before Clara went, she had me bring up several large, heavy sacks of lime from the shed. Told me it was for the stables, to dry the dampness. But she had me put 'em in the basement, Mr. Thorne, right near the coal chute. Lime, used to neutralize odors, to dry and preserve. It was a common farm supply, but the location was unsettling. Why the basement, an area Adeline rigorously kept sealed? "Did you ever see Clara or hear anything from the house in those last days?" Elias asked. Thomas shook his head solemnly. "I saw Clara the day before. She was standing by the drawing room window, just staring out. She looked like a caged bird that had given up trying to fly. And then," he lowered his voice to a rasp, "that night I heard a terrible, awful argument. Screaming, muffled but powerful. And a sound, a sharp, sickening thud. The next morning, Adeline was calm as a grave. Too calm. She told me Clara was gone." The story fit the mother's personality. But the sound, the thud, the lime in the basement, these were sharp edges of fear in the soft cloth of speculation. Elias thanked Thomas and walked away, the image of the caged girl and the sound of the thud echoing in his mind. The investigation was moving from a search for a runaway to a search for a crime. Elias spent the afternoon at the Blackwood County Archives researching the late Dr. Monroe. The doctor, a noted if eccentric physician, had perished in a house fire that started in his private study 5 years prior. The official report declared it an accidental death caused by an oil lamp tipping over while the doctor was conducting late-night research. Elias, however, noticed a curious detail in the archived newspaper clipping. The fire was swiftly contained to the study due to the rapid response of Mrs. Monroe. If Adeline was so meticulous and controlling, how could she have allowed an uncontained lamp in her husband's study? And why was the doctor, a man of precise habits, conducting work late at night alone? He found Dr. Monroe's specialties listed: forensic medicine and anatomy. The very skills that could allow someone to dispose of evidence cleanly. The thought sent a chill down Elias's spine. The dead father, the strange fire, the vanishing daughters, and the mother's cold iron control. Elias looked at the map he had drawn of the Monroe property, the basement, the secluded location, the lime. He had to get back inside the house, not as a casual visitor, but as a silent intruder. The time for polite inquiries was over. The house of horrors was waiting. Elias knew the risk was immense. Breaking and entering was a serious crime, even for an investigator. But the local sheriff had dismissed his findings, citing the lack of concrete evidence and Adeline standing in the community. He was on his own. He waited for the deepest hour of the night, around 2 a.m., when the moon was obscured by thick clouds, plunging Blackwood Creek into a suffocating darkness. The fog was his ally, muffling his steps and obscuring the house from the distant view of the town. Elias parked his rented buggy far down the road and proceeded on foot, equipped with a lock-picking kit, a heavy lantern, and a small but sturdy crowbar. He approached the back of the house, where the shadows were deepest and the kitchen entry offered the weakest security. The lock on the back door was old, but the mechanism was well maintained. After a tense, silent struggle that lasted 15 minutes, the tumbler finally clicked. Elias slipped inside, the cold, stale air immediately greeting him. The house was pitch black. Elias lit his lantern, shielding its glow to a mere sliver of light. The atmosphere was immediately more hostile than during the day. The silence was not just the absence of noise, it felt like a predator holding its breath. He moved with the precision of a trained man, avoiding creaking floorboards and draped furniture. He searched the main floor for the basement entrance. He remembered Adeline mentioning it was sealed. He found it in a secluded corridor off the main dining room, cleverly disguised behind a large, antique tapestry depicting a tranquil Kentucky hunting scene. The door itself was heavy, made of solid oak, and secured not just with a deadbolt, but with a massive old-fashioned iron padlock. Elias knelt down, his breath misting in the cold air, and began working on the padlock. His hands, usually steady, were slick with sweat. The minutes stretched into an eternity. He heard a soft, rhythmic creak from the floor above, a sound that could be the wind or could be Adeline patrolling her domain. He froze, listening. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence returning. Finally, with a soft metallic snap, the padlock yielded. Elias carefully lowered the heavy chain, pulled the tapestry aside, and gripped the rusted handle. The door opened with a slow, agonizing groan, releasing a blast of damp, earthy air that smelled distinctly of rot and chemicals, the lime. The basement steps were wooden and slick. Elias descended into the absolute darkness, his lantern beam cutting through the gloom. The basement was a sprawling subterranean labyrinth of vaulted ceilings, dirt floors, and support beams covered in cobwebs. It was not a typical root cellar. It was vast and deep, reflecting the immense size of the house above. He found the coal chute, and nearby the evidence Thomas had described. 3 large, partially used sacks of agricultural lime were stacked against a stone wall. The odor here was stronger, masking a deeper, more troubling smell. Elias began to sweep his lantern across the floor. He noticed a section of the dirt floor near the chimney foundation that looked recently disturbed. The earth there was darker, slightly less compacted than the surrounding area. He knelt down, running his fingers across the cold soil. It was loose. He grabbed the small crowbar and began to dig, slowly and methodically scraping away the topsoil. The only sounds were the scratching of metal on dirt and his own ragged breathing. After just a few inches, the crowbar hit something hard. Not rock, but something unnaturally smooth. Elias dug faster, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He exposed an edge of polished stone, far too large and regular to be natural. He uncovered more, revealing what appeared to be the lid of a heavy stone-lined box or compartment embedded into the floor. He could see faint, unsettling tool marks around the edges. He strained, using the crowbar as a lever. With a grinding protest of stone against stone, the lid shifted, revealing a narrow, deep space beneath. Elias held the lantern over the opening, his face draining of color. It was not a hidden treasure chest. Inside the compartment, carefully arranged, were a collection of small, personal items. Clara's missing possessions. A tarnished silver locket Elias recognized from her photograph, a small, worn, leather-bound diary, and a pair of delicate, custom-made spectacles. The sight confirmed the horrible suspicion. Clara had not run away. As he reached in to retrieve the diary, a floorboard directly above his head let out a loud, splintering creak. Elias froze, plunging the lantern light into the dirt. Adeline was awake. She was above him, and she knew someone was in her house. The sound of footsteps above, slow and measured, galvanized Elias into action. He snatched the diary and the locket, quickly pushed the stone slab back into place, and shoveled the loose dirt back over it, creating a passable illusion of undisturbed earth. He did not have time to relock the padlock. He scrambled up the stairs, shutting the heavy oak door as silently as possible, and quickly hung the tapestry back in place. He moved on instinct, retreating the way he had come, his pulse hammering against his temples. He could hear Adeline's voice, a low, unsettling murmur calling out from the top of the main staircase. "Who is there? I know you're here. Show yourself." Her tone was not one of fear, but of cold, possessive rage. Elias slipped out the back kitchen door and sprinted into the enveloping fog, not stopping until the silhouette of the Monroe house was swallowed by the darkness. He collapsed onto the damp grass by his buggy, gasping for breath, the small, leather-bound diary clutched in his trembling hand like a sacred relic. Back in the safety of his cold, stark boarding room, Elias lit a single lamp and turned the diary over in his hands. It was Clara Monroe's voice, finally, after weeks of silence. The entries were dated and meticulously written, chronicling years of psychological torment. The early entries painted a picture of a normal, if stifled, childhood. But the tone darkened considerably after the death of her father. Clara wrote of her mother's escalating control. October 12, 1894. "Mama doesn't like it when I spend time with Jane. She says Jane is common and will pollute my good nature. I feel like I'm wearing a corset that gets tighter every day. I miss Papa. He was the only one who could make Mama smile honestly." June 5, 1896. Eliza is gone. She left a note saying she had to be free or she would suffocate under the weight of Mama's love. Mama burned the note and told the town she was a lost cause, a disappointment. Mama keeps saying Eliza will regret it. I am afraid. Mama looks at me now like I am her only property left. The core of the horror began to emerge. Adeline Monroe was an emotional tyrant whose control over her daughters was a form of extreme psychological abuse, driven by a twisted, pathological need to keep her family pure and undisappointed by the world. The later entries became increasingly frantic. Clara detailed how Adeline's behavior grew erratic, especially around the anniversary of her husband's death. But one entry, dated 4 months before her disappearance, provided a chilling revelation. May 8, 1899. "I went into Papa's old study today. Mama keeps it locked, but the maid left the key. I wasn't supposed to be in there. The shelves are mostly empty, but in the bottom drawer of his desk, I found Papa's hidden notes. They weren't about medicine. They were about Mama. Papa believed Mama was intentionally poisoning him with small doses of belladonna, a slow poison to make him weak and dependent." Elias stopped breathing. Adeline hadn't just accidentally started a fire. She had potentially murdered her own husband, using her knowledge of the house and likely his own medical supplies to make it look like an accident. The fire was to destroy evidence, or perhaps to finish the job quickly when her slow poison was discovered. May 10, 1899. "I confronted her. I couldn't hold it in. Mama didn't deny it. She just looked at me with those cold eyes and said, 'He was going to leave me, Clara. He was going to expose me and ruin us all.' I did what was necessary to protect the family name. I tried to run. She locked me in my room. I am now her prisoner, just like Papa was. I think she knows I will tell someone." The entries that followed described a terrifying confinement. Clara was isolated, deprived of human contact, her food possibly rationed or tampered with. The final entry was scrawled with a desperate, shaky hand, October 25, 1899, the day before she supposedly ran away. "The air in the house is thick. Mama has been talking about the end of my disappointment. She brought a large, heavy object into the hall tonight. I can hear her scraping at the lock on my door. I am so weak I can barely hold the pen. She is going to finish what she started. I pray someone finds this. Please, tell Eliza, I am so sorry." Clara was not a runaway. She was a victim, murdered by her own mother, who sought to cover up a previous murder. The thud Thomas heard was Clara's body, the lime was for preservation and odor control, and the stone compartment was her grave. The locket and spectacles were deliberate, a final cruel gesture of possessive control over her property. Elias had found the truth, but it was far more monstrous than he could have ever imagined. Now he had to prove it, and to do that he needed help. Adeline Monroe was not just an evil mother, she was a cold-blooded killer operating behind the veil of respectability. Elias knew the diary, while damning, was not enough on its own. Adeline would simply dismiss it as the ramblings of her difficult, hysterical daughter. He needed an ally with local authority, someone who wasn't intimidated by the Monroe name and who could help him secure the house and excavate the basement without a formal warrant that Adeline could easily block. He found his unlikely ally in Constable Harold Jennings, the youngest and most disillusioned member of the Blackwood Creek Constabulary. Jennings was a quiet, earnest man, known for his diligence but often overlooked by the older, more complacent officers. Elias approached him in the early hours at the constabulary office, placing the diary on the scarred wooden desk. "Constable Jennings, I need you to read this. All of it. Now. This is not a request. This is a matter of life and death, even if the life is already gone." Jennings, initially wary and defensive, began to read. As he progressed through Clara's entries, his face shifted from skepticism to shock, and finally to cold, righteous fury. The reality of Adeline Monroe's calculated cruelty was undeniable in Clara's desperate, authentic voice. "Good God," Jennings whispered, dropping the diary as if it were burning him. "She poisoned her own husband, and she's done the same to Clara?" "She has. And the body is buried in the basement, Constable. She covered it with a stone slab and lime." "I found the spot," Elias explained, detailing his illegal entry. "We have to act now before she realizes I took the diary and cleans up the crime scene." Elias and Jennings immediately sought out the sheriff, a corpulent, lazy man named Silas. Sheriff Silas was furious, dismissing Elias's break-in as vigilante nonsense and the diary as hysterical, girlish scribbling. "You want me to tear up the home of a respected widow on the word of a trespasser and a mad journal? Get out, Thorne. I'll have you arrested for obstruction." Silas settled back into his chair, dismissing the entire affair. Jennings, however, stood firm, something Elias hadn't anticipated. "Sheriff, the diary details Dr. Monroe's belief that he was being poisoned. That's a second-degree murder charge on its own. The description of Clara's last night matches Thomas the gardener's testimony about the awful noise. The lime and the basement storage are too coincidental. We have enough for a preliminary warrant based on suspicious circumstances and credible testimony." The sheriff, faced with a determined subordinate and the legal necessity of following up on a murder accusation, finally conceded with a grunt of displeasure. "Fine. But you, Jennings, you're going up there with Thorne, and if this turns out to be nothing but dirt, you're both off the force. I'll make the call to the judge, but it'll take time. Get up there and ensure the scene is preserved. Do not touch anything yet." Elias and Jennings drove the constabulary carriage up the ridge, the cold sun struggling to break through the cloud cover. The house, usually silent, now seemed to broadcast a low, terrifying hum of tension. They arrived to find Adeline Monroe on her porch, dressed in her usual austere black dress, calmly sipping a cup of tea. She was waiting. Her composure was absolute, a mask of aristocratic control. "Constable Jennings, Mr. Thorne," she greeted them, her voice clipped and devoid of surprise. "To what do I owe this second, unnecessary intrusion?" Jennings, though visibly nervous, held his ground. "Mrs. Monroe, we have reason to believe that a crime has been committed on this property. We are here to secure the premises and await a warrant for a full search." A flicker of something, not panic but calculated fury, crossed Adeline's eyes. "A crime? By whom? I believe the only crime committed was the trespass of this detective last night." She gestured toward Elias. Elias stepped forward, his resolve hardened by Clara's words. "You are correct, Mrs. Monroe. I trespassed, And I found where you hid Clara's locket and spectacles in the basement. You didn't just let her run away. You imprisoned and murdered her, just as you likely poisoned your husband. The silence that followed was electric, shattering the morning air. Adeline placed her teacup down with unnerving precision. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face, the first genuine emotion Elias had seen from her, and it was pure malice. You have no proof, Mr. Thorne, only the fevered ravings of a disturbed child and your own wild conjecture. You will both leave this property immediately, or I will call for your removal. We are not leaving, Mrs. Monroe, Jennings asserted, pulling the diary from his coat. The proof is in the words of your dead daughter. Adeline's composure finally cracked, her eyes wide with a sudden devastating realization that her daughter's voice had survived her. She lunged, not for the constable, but for the open front door. She's making a run for it. Stop her, Elias yelled. But Adeline didn't run out. She ran in. Jennings and Elias pursued her, the confrontation having finally exploded into a desperate chase inside the House of Horrors. Adeline was surprisingly fast for a woman of her age and rigid bearing. She moved with purpose, racing through the cluttered, darkened hallways toward the rear of the house. Elias and Jennings followed closely, their footsteps echoing loudly on the polished wooden floors, destroying the oppressive silence that Adeline had so carefully maintained. Stop, Mrs. Monroe. You are under suspicion of murder, Jennings shouted, drawing his small service pistol, a crude but serious deterrent in that time and place. Adeline ignored them. She reached a door at the end of a narrow, seldom-used corridor, a door Elias had missed during his first cursory inspection. It was small, unassuming, and appeared to be a simple linen closet. But Adeline produced a tiny brass key from the neckline of her dress, unlocked it, and slipped inside, slamming the heavy door shut behind her. Jennings reached the door first, slamming his shoulder against it, but it was solid, and the lock held fast. It's bolted from the inside. Elias examined the doorframe. It's not a closet, Constable. The frame is too thick. It's a small side room, probably a panic room or a hidden chamber. We need to force it. They worked together, Elias using the crowbar, and Jennings using his own weight and strength. The wood around the bolt splintered, and with a final, massive heave, the door crashed inward. The small room was not a linen closet. It was a perfectly preserved small office cluttered with anatomical sketches, chemical vials, and medical instruments, the private hidden study of the late Dr. Monroe. The air in here was sharp with the smell of formaldehyde and old paper. Adeline stood in the center of the room, her back to them, facing a large floor-to-ceiling cabinet secured with multiple locks. She was frantically trying to unlock it. "You cannot stop me," she hissed, her controlled voice finally cracking with hysteria. "I will not let you take away my family. I will not let you ruin my memory of him." "Mrs. Monroe, surrender now," Jennings demanded, his pistol held steady. Adeline finally turned, her face a mask of utter devastation and madness. Her hands were empty, but her focus was on the cabinet. "You fools! You think you know the truth from that ridiculous diary? Clara was a liar, an ungrateful snake, just like Eliza. But she gestured towards the locked cabinet. He knew. He knew the depths of my love. He knew I would do anything." Elias noticed something important about the room. There were no scorch marks. This was clearly not the study that had burned down 5 years earlier. "The fire," Elias stated, his voice calm despite the tension. "The fire wasn't in his main study. It was here, wasn't it? You locked him in here and set the fire, intending to burn the evidence of your poisoning. But he was too quick. He escaped the flames and locked himself in a separate room to die of the poison. Or perhaps you had him moved, and this room was only partially damaged." Adeline's eyes snapped to his. "He was weak. He wanted to leave Blackwood Creek." He wanted to take the girls. He was destroying my perfect family. I had to prevent the ruin. I had to protect them from his influence. But you failed, Elias pressed. The diary survived. Clara survived long enough to tell us the truth. Adeline let out a horrifying, wrenching sound, a twisted combination of a sob and a scream. No. No, no, no. She was mine. They were all mine. Property to be controlled, to be perfected. In a final, desperate act, Adeline hurled herself at the locked cabinet and, with a last reserve of maniacal strength, ripped one of the iron hinges from the wood. She yanked the door open. The contents of the cabinet were not instruments or chemicals or documents. They were personal effects, carefully arranged and preserved, a pressed wedding suit, a perfectly tailored dress, a pair of men's dress shoes, and a hat. The clothing of the late Dr. Monroe. But tucked into the corner of the cabinet, laid upon a bed of yellowed silk, was a small, crudely made wooden box. Adeline grabbed the box and pressed it fiercely to her chest. He is still here, my perfect husband. He is still with me. He never left. Jennings moved to tackle her, but Elias yelled, "Wait! Look at the drawer!" Underneath the open cabinet, concealed by the door, was a wide, shallow drawer that had pulled open in the struggle. Elias's eyes widened in profound horror. Lying in the drawer, like macabre display pieces, were the doctor's preserved internal organs, kept in large, labeled jars. The organs were marked and indexed, evidence of Dr. Monroe's final, terrified private research, an analysis of his own body to confirm the poisoning. He had been conducting his own autopsy, documenting his wife's crime before he died. Adeline, seeing the drawer open, realized her final devastating secret was exposed. The horror was complete. She hadn't just murdered him, she had mutilated his remains to keep a part of him with her. "My love," Adeline cooed to the wooden box, "they will not take you from me again." Before either man could react, Adeline threw the small wooden box violently against the stone wall. The box shattered, revealing not relics, but a glass vial of colorless liquid and a small, rusted knife. In a terrifying fluid motion, Adeline snatched up the vial and swallowed its contents. She slumped to the floor, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, the chilling, self-administered poison taking effect instantly. The horrible, evil mother was dead, surrounded by the physical and psychological debris of her monstrous life. The silence returned to the house, but this time it was the heavy silence of finality, of an evil finally extinguished. The arrival of the sheriff, the county judge, and the local doctor transformed the Monroe estate into a flurry of official activity. Sheriff Silas, initially dismissive, was now pale and shaken by the sight of Adeline's body and the gruesome contents of the doctor's hidden study. The discovery of the preserved, autopsied organs was the undeniable proof that confirmed Clara's diary and Elias's suspicions. The judge immediately issued a full search warrant for the Monroe property, particularly the basement, to complete the investigation. Elias, exhausted but resolute, led Constable Jennings and 2 other deputies down the basement stairs. The air was colder now, the silence heavier. He pointed to the spot near the coal chute, explaining the appearance of the disturbed earth. "The stone slab is underneath. We'll need 2 strong men to lift it," Elias directed. The deputies, their faces grim, began to work. They used shovels to clear the surrounding soil and then inserted crowbars under the edge of the stone slab. With a synchronized effort they strained, their muscles bulging in the dim light of the lantern. The stone, heavy and unforgiving, finally groaned and lifted, revealing the narrow burial chamber beneath. A wave of cold, earthy odor rose from the trench. Elias held his breath and shone his lantern down into the cavity. The pit was deep and lined with stone, an intentional, well-constructed grave, reinforcing the monstrous premeditation of the crime. Lying within the trench, wrapped loosely in a heavy linen shroud, was the figure of a young woman. The shroud was stained with damp soil, but the silhouette was clear. "Clara," Jennings whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of grief and relief. The local doctor, who had followed them down, carefully examined the remains. "She has been here for some time," he noted, his voice strained. "The lime preserved the body to a degree, but there are signs of decomposition. No obvious external trauma that would suggest a struggle, but the overall presentation is consistent with a rapid burial following a sudden, non-violent death." His findings supported the poisoning theory detailed in the diary. Adeline had subdued or poisoned her daughter, then wrapped her and buried her with the macabre ceremony of a collector putting away a prized possession. As the deputies prepared to carefully remove the body, Elias noticed a subtle detail. Tucked deep into the stone lining of the grave, secured with a piece of dried mortar, was a folded square of linen, different from the shroud. It was small, a piece of fabric that seemed to have been placed there as a final desperate attempt to communicate. Elias carefully pried the linen from the wall. It was not a message from Clara, but a piece of fabric torn from a man's waistcoat and sewn hastily into the inner fold was a very small, meticulously folded piece of paper. The paper was clearly not from Clara's diary. Elias unfolded the paper under the light. It was a single cryptic sentence written in a confident, educated hand, presumably that of the late Dr. Monroe. "The first of the blood is not the end of the pain." Elias stared at the note. What did it mean? The first of the blood clearly referred to Eliza, the older sister, the first daughter to run away. The doctor must have somehow secreted this message to Clara shortly before his death, knowing his wife's pathological nature and fearing for his children. He was warning her. But if Eliza ran away, how could she be the first of the blood? The truth was now revealed. Adeline Monroe was a double murderer who had tormented her family for years. But the doctor's message suggested a terrifying possibility that Eliza's escape was a lie. Was the older sister, Eliza, also a victim, and her running away merely the first successful cover-up for Adeline's monstrous control? The horrifying story of the mother's evil was not yet complete. The cycle of pain might extend beyond the walls of Blackwood Creek. Elias has solved the mystery of Clara, but the truth about the missing sister, Eliza, is still hidden. Don't let this be the end of the story. Subscribe now to follow Elias Thorne as he tracks the truth to its terrifying conclusion in the next 3 chapters. With Adeline Monroe dead and the body of Clara recovered, the immediate danger was neutralized, but the full story remained terrifyingly unfinished. Elias was now operating with the full, if reluctant, support of Constable Jennings. They had the diary, the doctor's chilling organs, and the cryptic final note found in Clara's grave. Elias immediately focused on the older daughter, Eliza Monroe. If the doctor's note, "The first of the blood is not the end of the pain," was a warning, then Eliza's disappearance 6 years prior might have been another murder, disguised perfectly as a runaway case. He went back to the old files and records. Eliza was supposed to have left for New York City to become a painter. Adeline had been very public about her disappointment that her daughter chose a frivolous career over her family duties. Elias tracked down the shipping company that supposedly delivered Eliza's trunk to New York. The records confirmed a trunk was shipped, addressed to an Eliza Monroe, in the summer of 1893. But the handwriting on the shipping label was neat, precise, and distinctly recognized by the shipping clerk. It matched Adeline Monroe's hand. Adeline filled out the paperwork herself, the old clerk confirmed, peering at the file. Said Eliza was too distraught to deal with the details of the move. She paid in cash, a large sum too. This was a massive red flag. A runaway daughter would handle her own travel logistics, especially one determined to flee her mother's control. Adeline had fabricated the documentation of Eliza's flight to sell the story. Elias and Jennings then located the warehouse records for the New York receiving agent. A return receipt was filed 3 months later. The trunk had been claimed and sent back to Blackwood Creek, listed as unclaimed by addressee. The implication was horrifying. Eliza never made it to New York. Adeline had sent an empty trunk, used the tracking number to create a believable story for the locals, and 3 months later, quietly retrieved the unused evidence. The question became, where did Eliza go, and when? Elias pressed Jennings. Go back and interview all the neighbors, the old servants, anyone who was in Blackwood Creek in 1893. Don't ask if they saw Eliza leave. Ask if they saw her after the supposed date of her departure. Jennings returned 2 days later, his face grave. He had spoken to Martha, an elderly neighbor who used to bring Adeline small provisions. Martha's testimony was halting but clear. Eliza didn't leave in the summer, Mr. Thorne. She was here later. I saw her in the drawing room window around October of '93. She looked sickly, frail. I asked Adeline about it, and Adeline just said Eliza had come back for a visit before the winter, but Eliza never came out to say hello. Martha distinctly remembered the date because she had baked a special pumpkin loaf for Eliza, and Adeline had taken it, claiming Eliza was resting and couldn't be disturbed. Eliza had been trapped in the house for months after her supposed departure. The time frame was eerily similar to Clara's final days. Elias had a chilling certainty. Adeline was an archivist of her own crimes, Jennings. She wouldn't have two completely different disposal methods. She used the stone compartment and the lime for Clara. She likely used the same for Eliza. But where? She wouldn't put them in the same spot. They returned to the basement. The earth was cold, damp, and unforgiving. They spent hours scraping and probing the floor near the location of Clara's grave. Elias recalled the vastness of the basement, the labyrinthine construction. He noticed a slight discoloration in the far corner, near a supporting stone pillar, masked by a large stack of old, unused wood. They cleared the wood. The earth beneath was dark and unusually soft. They began to dig, their shovels hitting the distinct, dull thud of stone after only a few inches. This time the slab was smaller and the stone was rougher, perhaps an earlier, less refined effort. They managed to pry it open. The pit below was shallow and lined with the same stone. Lying within, decomposed beyond recognition and fused to the soil, was another set of human remains. Near the remains, a few preserved items, a tarnished gold locket with an engraving, and a faded silk ribbon. The doctor who examined the scene later confirmed the remains were consistent with a female approximately the age of Eliza Monroe, buried roughly 6 years prior. The horrifying story of Adeline Monroe was fully complete. She had not just murdered Clara and poisoned her husband, she had murdered both her daughters and meticulously covered up both crimes, driven by a pathological need for total control and her own twisted definition of family protection. The discovery of Eliza's body brought the horrifying truth of the Monroe House of Horrors into stark, undeniable focus. Adeline Monroe was not just an evil mother, she was a serial domestic predator, operating within the confines of her own home. The public and the sheriff's office were in shock. Elias and Jennings spent the next 2 days meticulously cataloguing the evidence from the hidden study and the 2 basement graves. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Monroe's autopsy. The preserved organs confirmed Dr. Monroe had been poisoned over time, likely with belladonna, administered in small doses to increase dependency, a classic control mechanism. The secreted note. The note in Clara's grave proved the doctor had suspected Adeline and tried to warn his daughter before he succumbed. Clara's diary documented Adeline's psychological torture, her husband's poisoning, and Clara's final terrifying confinement. Eliza's cover-up. The shipping records and Martha's testimony proved Adeline fabricated the runaway story to cover the first murder, followed by a second burial on the same property. Elias took one last walk through the house before the state sealed it. He stood in the main drawing room staring at the family portrait. He noticed the small scratch near Clara's mouth again, but he now looked at Adeline's painted face. It was serene, powerful, and utterly cold. The portrait was not a memorial. It was a testament to her ownership, a reflection of the perfect, controlled world she had sought to create and maintain through murder. The investigation had taken a heavy toll on Elias. He had spent weeks immersed in an atmosphere of suffocating, pathological evil. The authenticity of Clara's suffering and the calculated coldness of Adeline's actions were hard to shake. He found Constable Jennings outside, smoking a cigarette in the damp, cold air. Jennings looked pale and exhausted. "I can't believe we were walking around this town, having coffee in the Pig, and she was up here, with them," Jennings said, his voice flat with disbelief. "2 daughters, her husband, all because she couldn't stand the idea of them living a life she didn't approve of." "It's not love, Constable, it's possession," Elias replied, adjusting his tie. "Adeline saw her family as property. When they began to assert their independence, they became disappointments and had to be corrected, a correction that unfortunately involved final removal." Elias realized the true emotional weight of the case was not just the discovery of the bodies, but the realization of the absolute lack of human empathy behind the veil of respectability. He had to remind himself that he had succeeded, largely thanks to the small, crucial help from Thomas, the bravery of Jennings, and the ultimate desperate truth left behind by Clara. Elias composed a detailed, official letter to Clara and Eliza's brother in Louisville, detailing the full extent of Adeline's crimes, the location of the remains, and the evidence found. He included a copy of the final diary entries. It was a letter that would bring devastating grief, but also the final, undeniable truth the brother had been searching for. The bodies would finally be given a respectful, proper burial. He packed his small satchel, placing the diary, the doctor's note, and the photographs of the crime scene into a locked section. The case was closed, the wicked mother silenced by her own hand. As Elias stood at the Blackwood Creek train station, the small town seemed to shrink around him, no longer mysterious, but horribly, tragically clear. The fog had lifted, revealing a community scarred by hidden trauma. A woman approached him, Martha, the elderly neighbor who had remembered the pumpkin loaf. She didn't speak, but pressed a warm, slightly scorched piece of linen into his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "For those poor girls. Now they can finally rest." Elias nodded, the train whistle piercing the air. He knew he was leaving a changed man. The darkness he had faced was not a monstrous phantom, but the very real, terrifying darkness that resides in the human heart, cloaked in social acceptability and possessive love. The horrifying story of the evil mother would become a local legend, a chilling, authentic lesson in the terrors that can be found in the most domestic of settings. 6 weeks later, Elias Thorne sat in his small office in Louisville, Kentucky. The Blackwood Creek case, officially titled the Monroe Murders, had rocked the state. The details of Adeline's double filicide and uxoricide, all hidden beneath a facade of matriarchal piety, became a grim spectacle in the national press. The Monroe estate had been entirely sealed by the state. The house on the ridge, once a symbol of prestige and mystery, now stood as an undeniable monument to terror. Locals refused to go near it, and the structure was scheduled for immediate demolition, its foundation holding the chilling memory of 2 shallow graves. Elias had received a significant bonus and a promotion for his exhaustive, independent work, but the reward felt hollow. The case had not given him satisfaction. It had given him a profound understanding of human capacity for evil. The case had changed the way he saw every polite smile, every closed door. He looked at the only remaining item on his desk from the case, the small gold locket found with Eliza's remains. He hadn't been able to open it during the investigation. He took a tiny jeweler's tool and finally managed to pry the clasp apart. Inside, there was no picture. Instead, a small, tightly folded piece of dried flower petal, likely pressed years ago. Attached to the petal was a sliver of paper, upon which was written a single bold letter, G. Eliza had a secret, a connection, a hope for a future outside her mother's control, a person represented by the letter G. This person was likely the real reason for her attempted escape, and the reason Adeline had to stop her. Elias contemplated the implication, a final, hidden detail, a lost lover, a secret confidant. It was a detail that offered a small, bittersweet measure of human connection and resistance against Adeline's crushing tyranny. Eliza was not just a victim, she was a fighter who held onto a sliver of hope until the end. Elias wrote one last addendum to his report, noting the locket and the initial G, a silent acknowledgement of Eliza's final personal secret. He filed the report, officially closing the case. He decided that his future as an investigator would be dedicated to finding the truth hidden in the mundane, the evil that wears a respectable face. He would not chase phantoms or myths. He would chase the human darkness that was far more terrifying. The train ride out of Blackwood Creek had marked his physical departure. The final closing of the case marked his psychological shift. He had gone from a junior investigator to a seasoned, hardened professional, forged in the terror of the Monroe house. He stood up, put on his coat, and blew out the lamp. The office was dark, but the day outside was clear. The horrifying story of the evil mother was over, but the memory of Clara's diary, Eliza's locket, and Adeline's chilling smile would forever remain. A constant, haunting reminder of the psychological terrors that lurk just beneath the surface of civilized life in the year 1899. Elias Thorne had solved the mystery, but the mystery had left its indelible mark on him, driving him forward into a new, darker chapter of his life.